Do you believe in reincarnation? And what if we told you right now that there are real documented cases that prove exactly that? If you believe that nothing comes after death and that there must be a logical explanation for everything, then we are very curious to see how you explain these 15 mysterious cases. So let's jump straight into the first case, and this one will change your view of life and death forever. Number 15. The Case of Taranjit Singh. In northern India, an extraordinary story unfolded around Taranjit Singh, a boy from the village of Aluna Miana. At a very young age, Taranjit began to claim that in a previous life he had been a boy named Satnam from the nearby village of Chakchela. Satnam lost his life at a young age in a tragic scooter accident, a fate that Taranjit was able to describe with astonishing clarity. At first, his parents were confused. They could not understand why their small son kept mentioning names and places they themselves had never heard of. He spoke with complete confidence about people who had belonged to his previous life and described everyday scenes as if he had just experienced them. As he grew older, he mentioned more and more details, and every single one seemed to match the life of the deceased Satnam. One of the most fascinating details was his mention of a radio shop connected to Satnam. Taranjit said he had worked there in his previous life and described the shop in remarkable detail: where it was located, what it looked like, and which devices were sold inside. He even spoke about specific customers and the types of radios that were popular at the time. The remarkable thing was this: Taranjit had never been to that village and had no contact whatsoever with its residents. And yet, he was able to describe details that were later confirmed by villagers. Even more astonishing was Taranjit's knowledge of an old scar on Satnam's head. He explained that Satnam had gotten it after someone threw a stone at him. Then Taranjit pointed to the exact spot on his own head where that same scar was said to have been. A detail no one in his family could possibly have known. Satnam had died in an accident long before Taranjit was born. How could a child know something like this? Researchers began to investigate the case more closely. Among them was Dr. Ian Stevenson, a Canadian psychiatrist who documented possible reincarnation cases around the world for decades. He was known for his extreme thoroughness and collected over 3,000 such reports, many of them from India. He also included the story of Taranjit Singh in his research and later described it as remarkably credible. Stevenson and other scientists verified the boy's statements. They visited the places he mentioned, interviewed villagers, and compared every detail with Satnam's actual life. The result was astonishing. Taranjit's memories matched in every respect. From the names and the profession to the injury on the head, everything aligned. For many, this case became one of the most convincing pieces of evidence for reincarnation. There was no logical explanation for how a child could possess such information. The detailed statements Taranjit made could all be checked and confirmed. A highly credible case of reincarnation. But this was only the beginning. The truly shocking cases are still ahead. At this point, a short question for you. Do you believe in reincarnation? Simply write yes or no in the comments below. We're very curious to hear your thoughts. Subscribe to the channel and give the video a like. It's completely free and helps us continue creating videos like this. Thank you very much. Number 14. 7-year-old boy describes how he died in the September 11th attacks. The tragic story of this 7-year-old boy drew worldwide attention and left a deep impact on everyone who heard it. He claimed that in a previous life, he had died during the September 11th, 2001 attacks, as an adult man who worked in the North Tower of the World Trade Center. From his very first accounts, his statements were so precise that both researchers and the media took notice. The boy spoke with an unusual seriousness about things no child his age could possibly know. He described sitting in his office that morning when the ground suddenly began to shake. Then he said he heard screams, fire, smoke, and an intense heat spreading at a terrifying speed. He remembered the smell of burning metal, people trying to escape through the corridors, an image that gives many adults nightmares, and yet it came from the mouth of a child. His parents were deeply shaken. They swore they had never told their son anything about the events of September 11th. He was not allowed to watch the news, documentaries, or films. And yet he described details that only survivors or eyewitnesses could have known. He spoke about specific floors, elevators, emergency exits, things he should never have been able to know. Even his choice of words sounded unusually mature for a 7-year-old. In a conversation with a psychologist, the boy said through tears, "People around me were screaming. We wanted to get out, but the fire was everywhere. I could barely breathe. Then some people opened the windows, and I knew I had to jump." A horrifying thought. His voice broke. The words came hesitantly, but clearly. A memory no child could invent. The parents later reported that their son sometimes woke up screaming at night. He dreamed of flames, of smoke, and said things like, "I have to get out of here." He repeatedly drew tall towers and small figures standing at the windows. These drawings were almost unbearable for his family. Some researchers and reincarnation experts examined the case and found remarkable consistencies. It was determined that the boy's descriptions matched exactly what happened in the North Tower, even down to the floors where people were actually trapped. How on earth could a 7-year-old child know such details without ever having heard or read about them before? How is that possible? Some believe that memories of past lives can, in rare cases, surface in early childhood before fading over time. Others see it as an unexplained phenomenon that fundamentally challenges our entire understanding of consciousness. Because if a child speaks about experiences he could never have lived through himself, what does that mean for our view of life and death? Could this boy truly be the reincarnation of a man who died in the September 11th, 2001 attacks? Who knows? Number 13. The tragic case of Wijeratne Hami. In a remote village in Sri Lanka, a boy named Wijeratne Hami was born. Hami came into the world with severe physical defects that shaped his life from the very beginning. His arms differed noticeably in length, with one much shorter than the other. His hands and fingers were also uneven in size, creating a striking asymmetry. In addition, his body showed further deformities that severely limited his movement and even simple everyday activities. His parents were deeply distressed by their son's condition. They could not explain why he had been born with such severe deformities. There had never been a similar case in their family. His mother repeatedly emphasized that her pregnancy and the birth itself had been completely normal, without any complications. For the family, Hami's condition was a mystery that defied any medical explanation. But the villagers saw it differently. In their community, belief in karma was deeply rooted. Many of them were convinced that Hami must have done something terrible in a previous life and was now bearing the consequences. They said that anyone born with such severe physical disabilities was paying for the sins of a past existence. In their eyes, Hami was the reincarnation of a man who had once committed a crime, an idea that followed the boy throughout his entire life. The concept of karma is a central element in both Hindu and Buddhist philosophy. It teaches that every action, whether good or bad, has consequences for the future. Nothing happens without a cause. Everything we do, think, or feel leaves traces that eventually return to us in our lives. Within this belief lies a deep sense of moral responsibility, one that many people in Sri Lanka internalize from a very young age. Hami himself rarely spoke about his condition, but from time to time he made remarks that deeply unsettled the villagers. He said, "I did something very bad. I had an argument with a man from my village and I killed him." He never said anything more about it. When he spoke about it, he began to tremble. His voice broke, and he turned pale with fear. His parents reported that afterward, he often remained silent for days, as if an invisible burden were weighing on him. Some researchers who study reincarnation cases found Hami extremely intriguing. They noted that his case closely matched the accounts of other children who remembered acts of violence from past lives. Dr. Ian Stevenson also documented similar cases in which children were born with physical traits that corresponded to injuries from their previous lives. Hami's deformed arms and hands seemed to symbolically reflect a life in which violence and guilt had played a central role. Whether this was truly a karmic punishment or a medically unexplained coincidence remains an open question. But for the villagers, the answer was clear. They saw him as proof that no one can escape their actions, that life, sooner or later, balances everything. Could Hami really be the reincarnation of a man who committed a horrific murder? And does this mean that we will all have to atone for our bad deeds? If you think you've already seen and heard everything, then the next case is guaranteed to surprise you. Number 12. The Case of Dorothy Eady. Dorothy Louise Eady, also known as Omseti, was a British researcher and antiquities administrator who lived from 1904 to 1981. She claimed to be the reincarnation of an ancient Egyptian priestess named Bentreshit, and her statements astonished historians and archaeologists around the world. Because Dorothy Eady possessed an extraordinary knowledge of ancient Egypt that went far beyond anything she could reasonably have learned in her lifetime. Even as a small child, Dorothy experienced strange dreams. She said she saw towering columns, golden corridors, and temples covered in inscriptions whose meanings she somehow understood, despite never having been taught them. After a fall at the age of 3, during which she was briefly believed to be dead, her behavior began to change. She said she wanted to go home, to Egypt. To her parents, this sounded like an odd thing for a child to say, but for Dorothy, it was a clear memory. As she grew up, she developed an unusual fascination with everything connected to ancient Egypt. She read books, studied images of temples and statues, and repeatedly said that many of these things felt familiar to her. As she got older, her desire to travel to Egypt intensified, and when she finally arrived there, something happened that left even experienced Egyptologists speechless. Dorothy seemed to navigate the culture, language, and rituals of ancient Egypt with ease. She was able to decipher hieroglyphs before ever formally learning them. She used ancient Egyptian terms correctly and knew rituals and offering ceremonies that would only be confirmed by scientific discoveries decades later. No one could explain how she knew these things. Particularly impressive were her precise descriptions of the Temple of Abydos, one of the oldest and most sacred sites in Egypt. Dorothy claimed that in a previous life she had lived there as the priestess Bentreshit, serving under Pharaoh Seti I. She said that as a young woman, she had been brought to the temple to serve as a singer and attendant of the god Osiris. In her memories, she spoke of Seti with deep reverence, calling him her king. When she first entered the Temple of Abydos, she is said to have thrown herself to the ground and kissed the floor. She said she recognized the place, every stone, every hall, every inscription. Archaeologists accompanied her during her visits and were astonished to find that Dorothy Eady described access to areas that had not yet been excavated at that time. Later, many of her statements turned out to be correct. Dorothy claimed to remember specific rituals, offerings, and religious ceremonies. She spoke of the scent of incense, of chants in honor of the god Osiris, and of secret prayers known only to the priestesses. Her descriptions matched later discoveries in a remarkable way. Even the placement of certain rooms, the shape of the altars, and the sequence of the prayers were described correctly. Absolutely astonishing. Over the years, Dorothy gained great respect in Egypt. She worked alongside leading archaeologists, including Dr. Selim Hassan and Ahmed Fakhri, and her knowledge was regularly consulted during excavations in Abydos. Although many of her colleagues were skeptical, they acknowledged that her understanding of ancient Egyptian culture was extraordinary. She herself, however, remained humble, and always said that she was simply remembering things she had experienced before. Even later in life, she spoke of dreaming every night about her old home, the temple, the chambers, and Seti. In her diaries, she wrote that she sometimes felt as if she were living in two different eras at the same time. A deeply moving thought. Until her death in 1981, Dorothy Eady remained in Egypt and was lovingly called Seti, the mother of Seti. For many people, she remains a mystery to this day, one that uniquely bridges science and spirituality. The fascinating case of Dorothy Eady has left many people deeply impressed and led to one compelling question. Was this woman truly the reincarnation of an ancient Egyptian priestess? Number 11. The terrifying plane crash. The case of Rylann O'Banion is considered one of the best documented and most credible reincarnation stories of modern times. In the United States, a girl was born whose life was shaped by an extraordinary memory. A memory that challenged everything her family believed to be possible. Even in early childhood, Rylann showed symptoms that were first interpreted as nightmares or anxiety. But it soon became clear that something much deeper was behind it. Her parents noticed that their daughter would wake up screaming at night. In her sleep, she spoke of fire, of smoke, and of a crash. At first, her parents tried to ignore it, but the descriptions kept returning, and they became increasingly detailed. Before anyone truly understood what she meant, the little girl began to say that in a previous life she had been on an airplane that had crashed. What was especially striking was that Rylann began forming coherent sentences about these events at just 2 years old. She said it had been so hot inside the plane that it was hard to breathe. She spoke of fire, loud screams, and trees she saw through the window shortly before everything went black. Her parents were deeply shaken. How could a child of that age possibly know or describe such things in this way? The family had no connection to airplanes or to the place Rylann later mentioned. No one around her had ever talked about plane crashes, and the girl herself had never been on a flight. And yet she spoke about technical details. Seatbelt clasps, the noise of the engines, things a 2-year-old could neither understand nor invent. Her mother, Cindy, began writing down everything Rylann said. She wanted to understand what these memories meant. Over time, a pattern emerged. Rylann mentioned names, places, and details that eventually led her parents to a specific event, a plane crash in Kenner, Louisiana, in 1982. Shortly after takeoff, a Pan Am aircraft crashed, killing dozens of people. Among the victims was a young girl named Jennifer Schultz. Cindy began comparing her daughter's statements with official reports. To her horror, many details matched exactly. The surroundings, the wooded area, the heat, even the nature of the injuries. Even more disturbing, Rylann's description of her death matched the autopsy report of Jennifer Schultz in precise detail, but those records were never publicly available. So how could a child possibly know this? Researchers who study cases of childhood reincarnation took a closer look. They conducted interviews, reviewed records, and ultimately concluded that there was no logical explanation for the girl's knowledge. Even experienced psychologists admitted that such a level of detailed awareness was simply impossible for a child of that age. Many therefore considered the case one of the most convincing indications that reincarnation could be real. Today, Rylann's story is regarded as one of the most puzzling examples of unexplained childhood memories. A case that raises questions far beyond our understanding. A 2-year-old child describing things that only a crash victim could have known. How did Rylann know all of this? Absolutely fascinating. What comes next will change your view of life and death forever. Number 10. The Case of Andrew Lucas. The case of Andrew Lucas is considered one of the most fascinating and, at the same time, most emotionally moving accounts of reincarnation. It is so extraordinary because Andrew began talking about a previous life at just 2 years old, with a clarity that left his parents speechless. What initially sounded like imagination soon developed into a story that even experienced researchers could no longer ignore. Andrew was a cheerful, bright child, but early on, his parents noticed that he often spoke about things that were completely unusual for a child his age. He talked about airplanes, about war, about the ocean, topics he had never been exposed to. At first, his mother thought he might have picked something up from television, but the family did not watch war movies, and Andrew was far too young to read or understand complex historical events. One day, he suddenly began talking about his ship. He said he had been a Navy pilot and had served on the USS Natoma Bay, a real American aircraft carrier that operated in the Pacific. He even mentioned the name of a fellow serviceman, Jack Larson, and said they had been together during the war. His parents were stunned. How could such a young child know names he had never heard before? As Andrew grew older, more and more details emerged. He said he had been a pilot, that his plane had been hit and caught fire. He described crashing into the ocean and never resurfacing. These accounts were so precise that his parents decided to investigate further. They searched for the names, the ship, the mission, and to their astonishment, everything checked out. The USS Natoma Bay had indeed served in the Pacific during World War II, and there really was a pilot who died under the exact circumstances Andrew had described. His name was James M. Houston, Jr., a young pilot who was killed in action in 1945 during a mission over Iwo Jima. When Andrew's parents showed him a photo, the boy quietly said, "That's me." A moment that brought his mother to tears. Over time, Andrew also shared details that were later confirmed through military archives: the type of aircraft, the mission itself, even the names of other soldiers James Houston had served with. All of this information was accurate, and much of it could not even be found through public sources. Perhaps the most emotional moment came when Andrew visited the cemetery where James Houston was buried together with his parents. When he saw the grave, he stopped and suddenly began to cry. He said he recognized the place. He placed his hand on the gravestone and whispered, "That was me." A scene no one present would ever forget. The story of Andrew Lucas powerfully illustrates how deeply memories of a possible previous life can be embedded in a child's subconscious. Because a 2-year-old child who has never flown knows nothing about aircraft types, military units, or the names of historical missions. So where did this knowledge come from? Is Andrew Lucas truly the reincarnation of a young pilot who lost his life during World War II? Number 9. The Case of Manoj Kumar. The story of Manoj Kumar is considered one of the most credible and best documented cases of reincarnation. It was thoroughly investigated by the well-known reincarnation researcher, Dr. Ian Stevenson, and is still regarded today as one of the most convincing examples of his work. Because this case contains a remarkable number of details that later turned out to be astonishingly precise. Manoj Kumar was born on August 30th, 1964, in the Indian village of Baderi. At just 5 years old, he began speaking about a previous life as a man named Nawabsingh. He said that he had once been a soldier in the Indian Army, was later discharged, and then turned to a life of crime. Eventually, he claimed, he was killed in a shootout with the police in February 1964. Manoj was born roughly 7 months after Nawabsingh's death. When Dr. Ian Stevenson learned of the case, he began to investigate it in detail. He traveled to India, interviewed the families, verified the statements, and compared the locations Manoj had described. To his surprise, he found that many of the details the boy provided matched the known facts about Nawabsingh exactly. Even minor details, such as the location of the shootout or the clothing Nawabsingh was wearing that day, were described correctly by Manoj. Even more remarkable was the fact that there was no connection whatsoever between the two families. They lived in different regions, did not know each other, and had never heard of one another before Stevenson's visit. This allowed the researcher to rule out the possibility that Manoj's parents had unconsciously passed on information. What Manoj described had to come from another source, or from a memory he himself carried within him. Dr. Stevenson was known for his strict scientific methodology. Over the course of his career, he documented more than 3,000 reincarnation cases worldwide, conducted interviews, gathered evidence, and searched for rational explanations. In the case of Manoj Kumar, he found none. He concluded that coincidence or manipulation could be ruled out. For him, this case was a textbook example of how memories from a previous life could apparently transfer into a new consciousness. One particularly striking detail was the strong physical resemblance between Manoj and Nawabsingh. Stevenson compared photographs of both individuals, one showing Nawabsingh as an adult, the other Manoj as a teenager. The facial structure, the shape of the eyes, even the expression were nearly identical. Many observers said Manoj looked like a younger version of Nawabsingh, a fact that only intensified Stevenson's interest. In his report, Stevenson later wrote, "I have investigated many cases of reincarnation in my life, but this case is among the most convincing I know." When a researcher like Stevenson says something like that, it carries real weight. He was known for his caution and scientific rigor. He never searched for belief, only for solid evidence. The case of Manoj Kumar shows just how difficult it is to find simple answers to complex phenomena. How could a 5-year-old boy provide such precise information about a man who died before he was born? Is Manoj Kumar therefore the reincarnation of Nawabsingh? According to Ian Stevenson, we can answer this fascinating question with a clear yes. What comes next completely eclipses everything you've heard so far. Number 8. The Reincarnation of Anne Frank. The Swedish author Barbro Karlén, who passed away in 2022, caused a great deal of attention throughout her life with an extraordinary claim. She said she was the reincarnation of Anne Frank, the Jewish girl whose diary became one of the most powerful testimonies of World War II. A statement many people initially viewed with skepticism, but one that was difficult to ignore given the details she shared. Anne Frank was born in 1929 in Frankfurt am Main. Together with her family, she fled persecution by the Nazis and went into hiding in Amsterdam. There she wrote her world-famous diary, which she called Kitty. It contained her thoughts, fears, and hopes during a time when survival was at stake every single day. Shortly before the end of the war, she was discovered and deported to a concentration camp, where she died in 1945 at just 15 years old. About 10 years later, in the 1950s, a young girl in Sweden began saying things that deeply disturbed her parents. Barbro Karlén, not yet 7 years old at the time, said that her name was Anne, not Barbro. She said she had written a diary in another life, that she had been hiding from soldiers, and that they had eventually found her. At first, her parents dismissed it as childish imagination. But everything changed when Barbro began mentioning specific details from the life of the Frank family. She spoke about Amsterdam, about narrow staircases, and about the constant fear of being discovered. At one point, she said she had lived in a house where she had to escape through a hidden door into an attic. When her mother later saw photographs of the real secret annex in Amsterdam, she was shaken. Barbro had never been there, and yet she had described it with striking accuracy. Even the smallest details, such as the placement of furniture and the view from the window, matched. As a teenager, Barbro began reporting recurring nightmares. She dreamed of uniformed men, loud footsteps on wooden stairs, and screams that suddenly fell silent. In her dreams, she felt the cold, the hunger, and the despair. Experiences she later interpreted as memories from a previous life. These experiences shaped her so deeply that she eventually began writing about reincarnation and the spiritual meaning of human existence. One event from her youth is particularly remarkable. When she traveled to Amsterdam with her parents, she insisted on visiting the Anne Frank house. Before even entering the building, she said, "I know I've been here before." Inside, she broke down in tears and pointed out rooms to her mother before a guide had even mentioned them. She knew where the staircase to the hiding place was and where the diary had been kept. Her parents were speechless. Later in life, Barbro Karlén spoke openly about her belief that there is no separation between lives, only transitions. She said that what we call death is, in truth, a shift in consciousness. Many researchers and media outlets reported on her case. Some saw her as evidence of reincarnation, while others viewed her memories as the result of a deep psychological connection to Anne Frank. But one thing was undeniable: her words and experiences touched people all over the world. Until her death, Barbro Karlén remained convinced that she and Anne Frank were one. Two lives connected by pain, loss, and the search for peace. So is it possible that the soul of a young girl who died during one of the darkest chapters in human history was reborn as Barbro Karlén? Who knows? Number 7. The Case of Ian Hagedorn. Ian Hagedorn, a 6-year-old boy from Pensacola, Florida, caused widespread attention with his statements. He claimed that in a previous life he had been a police officer in New York, a man who was shot during a robbery. What initially sounded like a harmless childhood fantasy soon revealed itself as one of the most remarkable reincarnation cases of recent decades. Even at preschool age, Ian began talking about another existence. He told his parents that he had once worn a uniform, carried a gun, and had died in the line of duty. He spoke of nighttime streets, a small store, and a moment when everything suddenly went black. At first, his mother thought her son might have picked something up from television, but they did not watch crime shows or police series together. Ian's descriptions were far too precise, far too emotional to be mere imagination. He said he had been inside a small store, checking that everything was in order. Then men came in, armed, loud. One of them shouted, another fired a shot. Ian described falling to the ground, seeing blood, and then, suddenly, everything went quiet. He said he tried to breathe, but couldn't anymore. His parents listened in disbelief. How could a child who had never been to New York describe such a scene so vividly? Eventually, his story reached Dr. Jim Tucker, a renowned psychiatrist at the University of Virginia. Tucker examined the case and began searching for records of a real police officer who had died under similar circumstances. After extensive research, he discovered a report about the murder of a New York police officer who had been shot during a robbery in a store in the 1970s, exactly as Ian had described it. The similarities were astonishing. Ian had correctly identified not only the city, but also the approximate location and the sequence of events. Even the emotional elements, fear, anger, and the sudden sense of letting go, matched eyewitness accounts. Dr. Tucker later stated that it was impossible for a 6-year-old child to have had access to this information. None of it was publicly available or covered in media reports. For Tucker, this case was another puzzle piece in his long-term research into children who remember previous lives. He saw a recurring pattern: children spontaneously describing deaths, places, and people that later turn out to be real across many countries and cultures. The case of Ian Hagedorn was especially striking because it unfolded in a modern, verifiable context. To this day, it remains unexplained. Dr. Tucker repeatedly emphasized that it was 100% impossible for a 6-year-old child to have known about this case. For that reason, the case of Ian Hagedorn is regarded by many as evidence of reincarnation, and it has caused countless people to question what they believe is possible. What comes next pushes us to the very limits of what we think can be real. Number 6. The chilling case of Sumitra Singh. This mysterious story, which unfolded in a remote region of India's Etawah district, is considered one of the most disturbing cases in reincarnation research and has drawn worldwide attention. Sumitra Singh, a girl from a modest background, fell seriously ill and slipped into a coma. When she regained consciousness, her personality had changed dramatically. She was no longer the same person. She now displayed the traits, behaviors, and memories of another girl named Shiva Tripathi, who had tragically been run over by a train and killed just 2 months earlier. The two girls had never known each other and lived in different regions of India. What made this case so extraordinary was that Sumitra did not merely exhibit similarities to Shiva. She was able to recognize Shiva's family and friends and interact with them in a way that strongly suggested that it was no longer Sumitra Singh inhabiting this body, but Shiva Tripathi, who had died only weeks before. Shiva's family reported that Sumitra knew things only Shiva could have known. This left them deeply shaken and made the case even more unsettling than it already was. Now we come to the most terrifying part of this story. Researchers and experts who examined the case in detail concluded that the recently deceased Shiva may have taken possession of Sumitra's body. This meant it was not a classic case of reincarnation. Shiva was not reborn as a baby. Instead, she was believed to have entered the already existing body of Sumitra, a phenomenon regarded as unique in reincarnation research. It is assumed that when Sumitra became gravely ill and fell into a coma, she experienced what is known as a soul exchange. This would mean that the soul of Shiva, who had died 2 months earlier, entered Sumitra's body, while Sumitra's own soul was displaced. There are reports of people who undergo sudden, drastic changes in personality and behavior overnight. In the context of the soul exchange theory, such changes are believed to indicate that another soul has entered the body and pushed the original one aside. Some researchers even suspect that Sumitra Singh's body may have been inhabited by 2 souls at the same time, Sumitra and Shiva. This would be a form of possession, a situation in which a foreign soul or force takes control of a person's body, causing them to lose control over themselves. Eventually, Shiva Tripathi's family accepted Sumitra as the reincarnation of their deceased daughter and welcomed her lovingly into their home. Shiva's father said through tears, "When I speak to Sumitra, it feels like I am speaking to Shiva. She uses the same words, and the way she speaks is exactly like my daughter. Sumitra told me things that only Shiva could have known. That is why I am 100% certain that my daughter Shiva lives inside Sumitra's body." From that point on, Sumitra Singh lived with the identity of Shiva Tripathi and was recognized as such by those around her. Her extraordinary fate left a lasting impression on everyone who heard about it and inspired many to take a deeper interest in the subject of reincarnation. Despite extensive investigations, however, this case remains unresolved. No one, not even the most experienced reincarnation researchers, has been able to explain what truly happened. A deeply moving, yet profoundly unsettling case of reincarnation. Number 5, the case of Rylann Hammons. The case of Rylann Hammons is considered one of the most fascinating, and at the same time most inexplicable, reincarnation stories of our time. It has been documented by multiple researchers and is among the most thoroughly investigated cases ever published, because the statements of this young boy from Oklahoma were so precise that they left even the strongest skeptics speechless. Rylann was just 5 years old when it all began. He suffered from recurring nightmares that often jolted him awake in the middle of the night. Crying, he would run into his mother's bedroom and say, "I used to be someone else. I want to go home, to Hollywood." At first, his mother thought it was just a strange dream, but the words kept returning, night after night. And the stories Rylann told did not sound like those of an ordinary child. He spoke about a life in the film industry, about traveling abroad, about parties and famous actors. He mentioned that he had worked with a woman named Rita Hayworth, a Hollywood legend of the 1930s and 1940s. He said he had been a dancer, had performed on Broadway, and had traveled extensively. For a 5-year-old child who had never seen an old movie, this knowledge was simply impossible. At first, his mother was concerned, then increasingly curious. To find out what might be behind these memories, she borrowed books about Hollywood from the local library. While flipping through one of the books, Ryan suddenly pointed to a black-and-white photograph from 1932, taken from the film Night After Night. He shouted, "That's me, Mom! I was that man!" The photo showed a supporting actor who later became known as Martyn, a former dancer who went on to build a successful career in Hollywood. Ryan's mother could hardly believe it. She began researching and discovered that Martyn had indeed existed. He was an actor in the 1930s, later became a successful Hollywood agent, and died in 1964. But Ryan knew things about him that were not written in any book. He named colleagues Martyn had worked with, mentioned that he had a daughter, and even described the house he had lived in. When Dr. Jim Tucker became aware of the case, he began carefully verifying every detail. Tucker was known for his strict scientific approach. He examined more than 50 individual statements made by the boy, and nearly all of them could be confirmed. Ryan knew that Martyn had been married 4 times, that he grew up in New York, and that he had indeed worked with Rita Hayworth. He spoke of a pink house by the sea, expensive cars, and traveling by ship, and everything matched. Even Martyn's year of death, 1964, and the circumstances surrounding the end of his life aligned perfectly with Ryan's memories. What was especially striking was that Ryan knew details about Martyn's family that were not even publicly documented. He remembered a sister, a specific moment in the house when he spoke with his mother as Marty, and the name of the film studio that had him under contract. Even when questioned by strangers, Ryan stuck to the same accounts, without hesitation, without contradictions. Dr. Tucker later said that this was one of the most precise cases he had ever investigated. What makes Ryan Hammons so extraordinary is the emotional depth of his memories. He did not speak only about places and facts, but also about feelings, about joy, loneliness, and the regret of no longer being with his film family. When his mother eventually explained to him that Martyn had died long ago, Ryan broke down in tears. He said, "I didn't know I was dead." A sentence that deeply shook the entire family. Researchers see this case as a powerful indication that consciousness may continue beyond death, because there is no logical explanation for how a young child in Oklahoma could know so many exact details about the life of a long-deceased Hollywood agent. For Dr. Tucker, Ryan Hammons remains to this day one of the most compelling indications that the boundary between life and death may not be as clear as we believe. So, is Ryan truly the reincarnation of Martyn? Or does this case simply open yet another window into a mystery we do not yet understand? Number 4. Russian child Prodigy claims he came from Mars. There are many people who claim to be the reincarnation of other individuals. But the following case is extraordinary, perhaps one of the strangest of all. Because Boriska Kipriyanovich, a Russian child prodigy, said he was the reincarnation of a deceased Martian. A claim that sparked not only curiosity, but worldwide astonishment. Boriska was born in 1996 in the Russian city of Volzhsky. Even as a toddler, he displayed abilities that amazed experienced educators. He could read before starting kindergarten, spoke with remarkable clarity, and possessed an extraordinary memory. But what truly set him apart was what he one day revealed about his origin. He said he came from Mars. According to Boriska, he had lived on Mars in a previous life, at a time when the planet was still habitable. He spoke of an advanced civilization that possessed technologies far beyond anything humanity knows today. He said there were cities, spacecraft, and energy systems based on magnetic fields. Then, he claimed, a devastating nuclear war broke out, wiping out most life on the planet's surface. He himself said he died during that war. Before the catastrophe, he explained, he had been part of a Martian team that regularly visited Earth. The Martians, he said, attempted to make contact with early civilizations, especially the ancient Egyptians. He described how they passed on knowledge about pyramids, energy channels, and space travel. According to Boriska, the Martians maintained a close connection with a group of Egyptian priests who guarded the knowledge of the stars. These statements fascinated and puzzled researchers and media alike. Particularly striking was Boriska's claim that the Martians had discovered the secret of immortality. They would age only until the age of 35. After that, their bodies remained stable and unchanged. Mortality, he said, was not a law of nature, but a condition that could be overcome through consciousness and technology. For a child who spoke these words at the age of 7, the ideas were astonishingly precise and philosophically profound. Boriska also explained that modern space probes and rovers would not find life on Mars because the surface had been completely destroyed since the war. The survivors, he claimed, had retreated deep underground and now lived in subterranean cities. From the outside, the planet appeared lifeless. But beneath the surface, a civilization still existed, hidden yet active. A concept that deeply stirred the imagination of many. Russian media reported extensively on him, and soon he became a topic of discussion throughout the spiritual community. He was invited to conferences to share his memories. Researchers who met him in person described him as calm, polite, and astonishingly knowledgeable. He spoke about planets, gravity, and astronomy as if he had experienced them firsthand. His teachers said he possessed an intuitive understanding that could not be explained by formal education. Despite widespread skepticism, Boriska never wavered in his story. He said he could still remember the sounds of Martian cities, the technology of flying vehicles, and the colors of the sky, slightly reddish, but brighter than what modern photographs show. He spoke of a sky threaded with magnetic fields and of energy controlled by the consciousness of its inhabitants. His words were calm and confident, never uncertain, never searching. Many scientists remained skeptical of his claims. Yet even they admitted that Boriska's knowledge of planetary motion and physical principles was extraordinary. Some believed he might have access to unconscious information fields. Others saw him as a genius with an unusually vivid imagination. However one interprets it, the case remains a mystery. Is Boriska Kipriyanovich truly the reincarnation of a Martian? Or is his knowledge the echo of an ancient memory, one that may lie dormant deep within all of us? An intensely thought-provoking idea. Number 3. The heartbreaking case of Luke Byrd. Luke Byrd began saying things in early childhood that deeply confused his parents. He claimed to remember a previous life as Lou Gehrig, the world-famous American baseball player. One evening he said to his mother, "I used to play baseball and I died when I got very sick." A sentence that caught Kathy Byrd completely off guard. Henry Louis Gehrig was one of the greatest baseball players of all time. Born in 1903, he played first base for the New York Yankees. Despite his fame and extraordinary career, his life was overshadowed by tragedy. He developed an incurable neurodegenerative disease that was later named after him, ALS. Lou Gehrig died on June 2, 1941, just weeks before his 38th birthday. Luke was only 2 years old when he began talking about this former life, an age at which most children can barely form complete sentences. Yet his words were clear, confident, and filled with conviction. He spoke about baseball games, about a stadium, about uniforms, and about playing in New York. At first, his mother believed her son simply had a vivid imagination, but she soon realized that his stories were far too precise to be invented. Kathy later said that Luke mentioned many things she herself did not even know. He spoke about specific Yankees players, about the rivalry with the Red Sox, and about the feeling of standing in front of a cheering crowd. One day, she showed him a photo album with old baseball pictures. When Luke saw a photograph of Lou Gehrig, he immediately pointed to it and said, "That's me." Kathy was shaken. Her son had never seen an image of Gehrig before, and yet he recognized him instantly. A particularly striking moment came when Luke mentioned Yankee Stadium. He called it by name, even though he had never been there, and his family had no connection to baseball at all. When Kathy began checking his statements, she discovered that many of the details were accurate. Luke even described the house Lou Gehrig had lived in and shared facts about his family that later proved to be correct. Everything he said, names, places, events, matched in an astonishing way. Kathy Byrd began documenting her son's experiences. She conducted interviews, compared historical records, and came to the conclusion that Luke knew things he could not possibly have known. His memories were so vivid that they changed her life. She began to seriously consider the idea of reincarnation, something she had previously thought impossible. As Luke grew older, he asked his mother to visit Lou Gehrig's grave. When they finally went there and Luke stood in front of the grave, he broke down in tears. He said he was glad to be home again, a moment Kathy Byrd later described as the most emotional of her life. Luke Byrd's story was published in her book, The Boy Who Knew Too Much, and moved people all over the world. For many, it remains one of the strongest indications that memories of past lives may truly exist. Because how else could a 2-year-old child know so much about a man who had died decades earlier? Absolutely fascinating. Number 2. The Case of Chanai Chumalaiwong. Chanai was born in the year 2000 and began speaking about memories from a previous life at just 3 years old. He said he had once been a man named Buakai, a teacher at a village school. Chanai described this former life with astonishing accuracy: his work, his colleagues, his students, and even the tragic moment when he was shot and killed. He was able to name the places where Buakai had lived and worked, as if he had experienced them himself. What stood out in particular was the fact that, in his current life, Chanai was born only a few kilometers away from the village where Buakai had actually lived. This proximity caught many people's attention and led to further investigation. Researchers and villagers followed up on the clues, and the details Chanai provided could indeed be verified. He said that Buakai had been riding his motorcycle when he was suddenly shot by a man named Singh. Chanai spoke calmly, yet with striking precision, as if he still remembered the moment clearly. His description matched a documented murder case from the 1970s. Even the names and the exact location of the crime that Chanai mentioned turned out to be correct. How could a 3-year-old child possibly know all of this? For many who knew him, there was only one explanation. Chanai Chumalaiwong was the reincarnation of the teacher Buakai. A story that made even the most skeptical researchers stop and reflect, and raised some truly profound questions. Is the soul perhaps immortal? Have we all already lived multiple lives and simply cannot remember them anymore? A truly, truly fascinating thought. Number 1. The train disaster. Karen Fraser, born in December 1965, had suffered from recurring nightmares since childhood. In these dreams, she saw horrific scenes: derailing trains, collapsing bridges, the ground shaking beneath her. She felt herself dying, over and over again. Each time she woke up drenched in sweat, her heart racing with the overwhelming feeling that she had just lost a real life. Absolutely terrifying. What disturbed her most was that these dreams seemed to be connected to real events. Often, shortly afterward, she would hear in the news about actual train accidents or earthquakes that unfolded in eerily similar ways to what she had seen in her visions. That frightened her, but it also awakened a deep curiosity. She wanted to know where these images were coming from. Over the years, the dreams became more and more detailed. Karen saw old locomotives, steaming tracks, snow, and people dressed in clothing from a long-forgotten era. One name kept appearing: Wellington. She didn't know what it meant, but she was certain it was connected to her former death. So she began to investigate. Her research eventually led her to the deadliest avalanche disaster in U.S. history: the Wellington train disaster of 1910. A massive snowstorm had trapped 2 trains in the mountains of Washington state. On the night of March 1st, A lightning strike triggered an avalanche that tore the trains from the tracks and hurled them down into the valley. The rail cars plunged down the slope into the Ty River Canyon. 96 people lost their lives. It was a tragic catastrophe that etched itself deep into the collective memory. When Karen read about this disaster, she felt chills run through her body. Everything matched: the snow, the trains, the panic, the feeling of being trapped. But the most shocking moment came when she saw the list of victims. That's when she came across a woman named Nellie Sharp. Karen immediately felt that this name meant something to her. The more she read about Nellie, the stronger the sense of connection became. Nellie Sharp was born in 1893 and died at just 26 years old in the Wellington train disaster. She was a musician, a golfer, and a journalist, just like Karen herself. These parallels would not let her go. She later described it as looking into a mirror of the past. When Karen finally saw an old photograph of Nellie, she froze. The resemblance was astonishing. The same facial structure, the same eyes, the same posture. Even people who knew Karen confirmed that the two women looked strikingly alike. It was as if the past was staring back at her. Karen felt increasingly drawn to Nellie's life. She began reading everything she could find about her, searched through historical records, and eventually traveled to the site of the disaster. When she stood in the mountains near Wellington, at the exact place where the avalanche had swallowed the trains, she was overwhelmed by a deep sense of familiarity. She said she knew she had been there before. Tears streamed down her face. From that moment on, she was convinced her dreams were not mere nightmares. They were memories. Memories of a past life that ended on a snowy night. Many people who know her story are convinced that Karen Fraser is the reincarnation of Nellie Sharp. Because how else can it be explained that someone born in the 20th century could describe, in such vivid detail, a disaster that occurred 55 years before her birth? Could dreams be gateways to something beyond life itself? Could they be memories of past existences that surface in the moments between sleep and waking? Perhaps the next time we dream, we should pay closer attention, because they may be memories from previous lives. What do you think? Have we already lived many lives and simply can't remember them? Is there something like an immortal soul? Which case fascinated you the most personally? Write it in the comments below. We're very curious to hear your thoughts. If you enjoyed the video, we'd really appreciate a like and a subscription. Thank you very much.